Good morning, Lightning Force. My name is Sergeant First Class Johnson, and I'm the Battalion EOL. Here with me is Sergeant First Class Lacey, who is our Brigade EOA. Sergeant First Class Lacey will be giving us a class on communication skills.
So, Sergeant First Class Lacey, I'm the 35th Signal Brigade Equal Opportunity Advisor, and today we're going over communication skills as was previously stated. Wonderful slides, check them out, TLOs. So communication. So communication is a process of using words, sounds, signs, or behaviors. This is the exchange of information to express your ideas, thoughts, and feelings to someone. So what are some examples that the meaning of the message that is sent was misunderstood? Think about that for a second. All right, so in addition to words of the message, communication includes nonverbal cues such as body language and tone of the communication. Do you remember how the message was misunderstood? Here we go. So these are some key elements of the communication process. So we got the communicators, message, channels, environment, and feedback. So communication is basically the sends and receives. So that's how that happens. And the message is the object of the communication to make sure you want to say what the message clearly defines. And channels is the conduit for a delivery message, via phone, as a voice, as a text message, hand and arm signals, smoke signals. Environment, that's a physical location, personal experiences, and your cultural background. All that has many things to do with how you're going to be able to comprehend the person that you're talking to. And feedback is that's the response of the receiver. So moving on to the next slide. So some modes of the communication. So you got verbal communication, which is written, and oral communication. So verbal communication is basically just the words of the message. How are you going to get that through to your receiver? So when you talk to another person, you give out verbal and nonverbal communication signals, right? So effective verbal messages are messages that are brief, they're organized, they're free of jargon, and they're oriented to the receiver. So if I'm trying to give a certain person, like a civilian, a message, I would probably not say HUA and use acronyms that we all know and love and cherish deeply, but we would probably use just straight words that we all are communicating around the world. Instead of saying DFAC, we may say dining facility as an example. So written communication is the effectiveness of written, the effectiveness of written communication depends on the style of writing, vocabulary used, grammar, clarity, and the precision of language. So that kind of goes with the same thing when you're talking or writing. If you don't want to write in anger because your message may be unclear, may be full of just non-factual information and whatnot. And also at the same time, if you may want to specify exactly what you're trying to do versus a vague thing. So if you say, hey, clean the motor pool, you might want to say, hey, we need to go down, we need to sweep, we need to mop, we need to pull the grass out, we need to weed eat, we need to mow, we need, so you're going to be specific to make sure your communication is clear. All right, so not only do you have the verbal communication, you have nonverbal communication, which is touching, eye contact, smiling, body language. Touching is perhaps probably the most powerful nonverbal communication. Anger. So if I punch you, obviously that very good communication, saying that you're upset or I'm upset, right? So if I put my hand on your shoulder or give you a hug, those are things of really good communication to let people know. If you're tenderness, if you're kind, if you're nice, things of that nature. So eye contact, obviously if I'm rolling my eyes, that means, I'm not really paying attention. I really don't care if I'm sleeping, and these are all things, examples for that. So smiling, so if I'm smiling, that means I'm probably happy, right? Or if it's a weird smile, then maybe I'm confused, but I'm just trying to think that I understand what you're saying, but I really don't. If I'm frowning, if I'm angry, so forth and that. Let's see, take a second. I want you to see if you can remember any of the barriers to communication. So some of them are pretty tough, some are really pretty easy. So go, think. Time's up. All right. So barriers to communication. So we got physical barriers and perceptual barriers. So physical barriers are environmental, you got noise, objects, distance, temperature, physical health. Perceptual barriers are past experiences, hidden agendas, and stereotypes. So physical barriers are pretty plain and simple. If I can't talk to you through a wall, if I could, you could probably barely hear me. It's muffled. So that's probably not a very good way to communicate. You want to take that wall away, right? So noise. So if you're in the heat of the battle, if there's gunshots going on, if there's jets flying over you, if the music's too loud or things of that nature, it's kind of hard to hear. So you may not get the actual message that you want to receive, right? So objects, that goes back to the same thing. It's like if it's a closed door, then that's probably not a good way to communicate that way. You might want to open the door to make sure your message is received. Let's see. So distance. Distance is a big one, right? So if I'm trying to talk to somebody and you're a kilometer away, pretty good chance my message is not going to be received the way I want it to be received, right? So therefore, you probably want to close that distance a little bit. Currently, right now, due to the coronavirus, we got a 6-foot, space that we got to play with. So, talk a little bit louder. Make sure your message is clear and concise. Let's see what else we got. Temperature. So, temperature is basically if it's too hot or if it's too cold, one may not be actually thinking about what's going on, right? So it'd be like, hey, I'm too cold, I'm shivering, I'm not even listening to what you're saying because I'm thinking I'm about to freeze to death or I got frostbite. So my mind is working in other ways to where I don't even know what you're even talking about, right? If it's too hot, same thing, I'm getting woozy, maybe I'm a heat cat 5, right? I'm about to go down, I'm dehydrated, I'm dizzy. And so those are things that people need to be aware of, like, hey, especially if the message is, has to do with safety or things of that nature. So physical health. Physical health is a big deal. So if I'm sick or if I'm not feeling well, I'm not thinking about the conversation. I'm not thinking about the communication. I'm not thinking about what we're talking about. I'm thinking about, am I about to throw up? Am I, do I have a headache? Do I have shivers? Am I cold? Am I going to get people sick? So these are things going through your mind versus just having a one-to-one conversation, right? So perceptual barriers. Perceptual barriers. So past experiences. So I may have a different experience with you. It may be great, right? So we may have a really good relationship, and I'm listening, I'm focusing on every single thing you're saying. But on the other side, if I don't like you, if we had bad past experiences and I hate you, so then therefore I don't care what you're saying. So I'm not even listening to what's going on with you because I don't like you. So therefore, what you say has no values to me. It has no value. I don't need to hear what you have to say. Hidden agendas. So if I already know exactly where I'm trying to go, if I'm already trying to manipulate the conversation to where it's going to go, then I'm probably not going to even listen to what you're saying. I just wait for you to stop talking, and then I'm going to input what I need to do. So your message that you're trying to send to me is not even registering because I'm already trying to manipulate how it's supposed to go. And also, so stereotypes. So if you have certain stereotypes with certain people or certain races or certain certain colors or certain sexes or certain anything, then you already got a predisposed idea of how that person is going to relate to you or how that person is going to act. So if it's like I'm from the north and I'm talking to someone who's from south, if I'm from Indiana and someone from the swamps of Florida, I may say, hey, I need to talk a little bit slower because their education is not as good as mine, right? That's obviously not true, but that could be a stereotype that someone has, and therefore they'll talk slower, and they think they're, someone's not as smart as them, and so therefore they're already having predisposed ideas and thoughts of what's going on, so they're not really communicating effectively. And it also kind of goes with past experiences, emotional, right? So emotional barriers. So if I'm upset or angry and you're trying to talk to me and have a civil conversation, then that may not work at all because I don't care what you're saying. All I'm thinking about is that activating event that just happened and I'm just angry, so I got all these other thoughts that are going through my head and I'm not really controlling my emotions. A little MRT for you, by the way. All right, so let's go to elements of listening. So elements of listening, we have receiving, which is actually hearing, right? Attending, giving attention to what was heard. So to be attentive, you have to, eye contact, body language, all that good stuff to make sure everyone understands that, hey, I'm here, I'm listening to you, I'm ready to hear what you have to say. So understanding, learning what the speaker means. And then responding, which is a form of feedback that completes the communication process. So, hey, you, this is me, I'm tracking, I understand what you're trying to say, and then remembering or being able to recall or retain for use later is like super big on this, right? So when you communicate to each other, you say, hey, I'm hearing you, I'm attentive, I'm sitting here, I'm upright, my posture is, I'm not laid back, I'm not sitting on my phone, right? I'm not writing an email, I'm attentive to the conversation and trying to make sure that you know what's going on. So when I'm understanding, I'm actually providing effective feedback. So say, hey, we have to be in the motor pool at 10 o'clock. I understand you, I hear you, I repeat back, okay, 10 o'clock, motor pool, tracking, and that's the good form of feedback. And then remembering that once you say it again, allows you to remember what's going on and helps everything out. So types of listening. So you have active listening, inactive listening, and selective listening. So active listening is pretty self-explanatory, right? So you're actively listening. So you're providing feedback. You have that posture that is good, right? You're having eye contact. Everything's good to go, and everything is one-to-one. Everyone understands what's happening, right? Inactive listening. So that's hearing only the words. You hear the words in your mind, but it's wondering, and there's no communication actually taking place, right? So I'm looking at you, but I'm staring off into space like, right, so that's not good, right? That's what it looks like, right? You don't understand what's going on. You're not providing feedback. You're not attentive. And selective listening. So I've been married for quite some time, and at times I hear my wife's talking, and I say, yes, got it, yes, tracking, yes, ma'am, all that good stuff. But I have absolutely no idea what she just said, right? That's just me. It's probably not everyone. But I'm sure you have wonderful examples of selective listening as well, right? But that's basically those. So we have some wonderful methods to become better listeners, right? So have a reason or purpose for listening. So that's always, everyone wants a goal. What's your motivation in this conversation? What's the ballast? What's the value of this conversation? So have a reason, have a purpose for listening. All right. So you need to suspend judgment. So all your perceptions, all your biases, all those things, you throw those out, right? So you want to have a one-on-one or a one-on-two if you're in a group, or if you're in an actual a meeting or whatnot. You want to have ballast. You want to have that reason, and you don't want to say, I don't want to be here. This meeting's stupid. Why are we here? You don't want that. Throw that out. You're obviously there for a reason. There's probably going to be some good information. There may be some bad information, but that's not for you to decide up front. That's for you to decide in the AAR afterwards, right? So resist distractions. So phones. Phones are huge, right? So everyone's got Facebook, Twitch Face, Snapchat, all that wonderful stuff, right? So put your phone on silent, turn it off, do whatever it is. Don't be typing on an email or something. If a soldier's coming up and they're wanting to have a conversation with you, and it may be very, very important, they're having issues, you don't know. So just keep all distraction, right? Become a better listener. Focus on the person that's listening. Wait before responding. So a lot of people listen to respond instead of waiting and understanding what the conversation is, and then develop an idea based on all the information that you just learned. So wait before you respond. Don't just cut off because you may not get the entire message, or you may perceive you know exactly what someone's saying, but you really don't know what they're saying until it's all the way done, right? So seek important themes. So instead of just pulling different words out that just like, oh, this is just what it is, this is what I understand, there may be a theme, right? So it may be, safety, or maybe like mission essential, or it may be family, or it may be morale, whatever it is, take the theme out of there and try to focus on what's going on with that. And then respond to comments. So if someone does make a comment, don't just sit there and listen and just, got it, checking, right? So you actually want to respond to what they're saying. So if I say, hey, I'm having issues at home, you're like, oh, really? What issues are you having? And then it's like, oh, well, I got financial problems, whatever. And then you can say, okay, I got it, tracking. So financial problems, like what kind of financial problems? Have you tried to go anywhere? Have you talked to anybody about this? And then it just keeps going and going and going, right? So you're having a good dialogue. And avoid blocks that obstruct effective listening, right? So evaluation, unsolicited advice giving, diagnosing, analyzing, and topping, right? So these are also an MRT, right? So you don't want to be one-up. People, so you don't want to top somebody. It's like, hey, I have a problem, when I was swimming the other day, I got bit by a piranha. You don't say, whoa, piranha, that's nothing. See this scar? Great white 93, right? So you don't want to top the other person, right? You don't want to diagnose and analyze. You don't want to say, oh, I'm having financial problems. You're like, oh, well, that's probably because you're living outside your means. That's a horrible thing you should do. You just bought that brand new car. That was dumb. Like, you shouldn't have done that. I don't even know why. Does your wife even, do you have food? That's the thing. Didn't you just have a baby? Like, what are you doing with your life, right? So don't do that either, right? So you want to get the information. You want to become a good listener, and you want to provide effective, good feedback, not just random stuff that you just want to throw out there, right? So feedback. So response from the receiver, which gives the communicator an idea how the message is being received. So this is very, very important. So you want to provide feedback. You want to let the sender know that you are receiving the information. And then you have two types of feedback, which is evaluative and non-evaluative. So evaluative feedback is when an individual assumes that he or she can distinguish between right and wrong and good and bad, right? So non-evaluated feedback is when you address an observable behavior. So what you want to do is give good, effective feedback based off the information that you heard, which is going to help the situation, not take away from the situation. Okay, so now we're going to go into guidelines for giving feedback. Feedback is usually offends a person's self-esteem, so it's difficult for a person to respond. Always respond to an observable behavior when giving feedback. Do not attack a person's sense of self-esteem. Ensure feedback concerns what is said or done, not why. So some of the guidelines is describes rather than judge. All right, so you want to describe what is going on with the feedback, as in, like, hey, you did really good with the range today. You had everyone online in a good time. Safety was really good. You did all those wonderful things. You don't want to judge and say, well, you could have did a lot better because you were like yelling and screaming and everything, and I think that like looks badly upon you, right? So we described those earlier. So moving right along to be specific rather than general. So kind of the same situation what I was saying about the range, right? So you want to, if you give them good positive feedback, you want to say, hey, you did really, really well at the range. Your breathing was under control. Your trigger squeeze was on point. I noticed that you didn't, jerk your weapon around or anything like that. You did really, really good. Your body position was really well and all that stuff. You don't just say, hey, you did good at the range today. So you want to reinforce what you're trying to give feedback about, right? So you want them to understand, like, okay, these are the good things that I did, and these are the specific bad things you did, right? So that way they can fix it if they need to. So that's the whole reason we give them constructive feedback, right? So taking into account the needs of the receiver and the sender, right? So basically, what has to happen for them to understand that, hey, this is the feedback that I need, this is the feedback that I deserve, this is the feedback that I'm looking for, versus just giving random stuff out there. All right, so analyzed to ensure clear communication. So that basically means your feedback is analyzed. You're not just randomly throwing stuff out there, right? So if someone comes into my office and says, hey, how did I do at the range today? I don't just randomly say, oh, you did great. It was wonderful. I'm not sure what you're trying to ask me. Like, did you qualify? Well, I qualified, but I got like a 26 out of it. And it's like, okay, well, then you did good, right? So you want to basically make sure the specific stuff. For one, it shows that you care, right? It shows that you're paying attention to your soldiers. It shows that you're paying attention to everyone around, and then your soldiers understand that they trust you, and they see that you are actually giving some sort of insight onto those things. So you say, yeah, you did good. Your body position was good. I noticed your sight picture changed a little bit. Certain things like that. So you actually understand exactly what you want to say, when you want to say it, how you want to say it, and you're not just randomly throwing stuff out there. All right, solicit rather than impose, right? So as soon as they come in and say, hey, how you doing or what's going on, you say, oh, pretty good. I noticed you sucked really bad at the range today. That was the horrible, most god-awful display of marksmanship I've ever seen. And they're like, I just came in to say hi and see how you were doing, right? So there's a time and place for everything, so don't just randomly start tearing people up for no reason. So if someone comes in and asks you, like, hey, Sergeant, how did I do? What can I change? What can I do with that? That's when you want to provide the feedback, not necessarily just randomly whenever it is. Because down here it also says ensure it's well-timed. I'll get into that in a second. So direct at a person's behavior, not at the person. So the same thing, you want to say, okay, you could have did this better. Your sight picture was off. Your trigger squeeze, you're just jerking it, which is moving your weapon up and down. Your breathing's off, and like all that good stuff. Don't just say, hey, you're horrible. You don't know how to hold a weapon. This is the worst display ever, like I said. Just like tearing that person out. You want something that the person can actually fix, which is directed at the behavior the receiver can control, right? So you can't just say, oh, well, you would have did a lot better, but it was so hot. outside. You know, it's very hot. I can't, you know, you did horrible. You should have did it on a better day. Okay, so that doesn't really help much. And the thing, the receiver can't control the weather, right? So something that someone can actually fix. And then ensure it's well timed and ensure it's planned. All right, so moving right along. Eventually, the guidelines for receiving feedback, right? So establish a receptive atmosphere, state what you want feedback about, check what you have heard, and maintain an objective attitude about the feedback. All right, so you want to establish the receptive atmosphere. So you probably don't want to lock a soldier up, put him at parade rest, or put her at parade rest, put your knife hand him right in the face and say, you will accept this feedback, you know, because they're not going to accept the feedback, right? They're going to get defensive. They're not going to listen. They're going to stand there and just in receive mode, but not really in receive mode. They're just going to stare blankly, and whatever feedback you're trying to give them, they're not going to take it. And state what you want the feedback about, right? So if I say, hey, how did I do at the range? You know, how was my zeroing? You know, how was my sight picture? Did you see my breathing? Was I breathing on the up or the down? Did I alternate? You know, like how did I look? And what was going on with my body position off? So when I receive feedback, I want to know exactly what I want. You know, I tell the person giving me the feedback, like, this is what I want you to look at. Even before you even get down to shoot, you can actually say, hey, I want you to watch this. I want you to notice this, so I can get the feedback that I'm looking for. All right, and then check what you have heard. Right, so am I telling you this correctly? Am I receiving it correctly? Make sure it's good to go. It's like, okay, was I controlling my breathing? So the next time I go down and I shoot, then I know, like, okay, I see what I did wrong. And that makes sense, right? And then maintain an objective attitude about the feedback. Like I said earlier, a lot of people get very, very defensive when you try to give them feedback. So the idea is not to belittle people, and it's not to take it and get defensive myself and say, okay, well, that's wrong. You know, you're a liar, or you're just saying that because you're jealous, or whatever it is, right? So you need to have an objective attitude about it, and so take it into consideration. You know, if you use the feedback, you use the feedback. If you don't use the feedback, you don't use the feedback. But it's not a point to where you're going to argue and just have a bad attitude about it, right? So feedback is there to help you, not make it worse. So benefits of giving and receiving feedback. All right, so it's an exchange of information. You know, it's achieve personal growth. Provider finds out about self. Receiver gains insight. Creates an open environment for effective operational and interpersonal communication, and aids in the preparation for the future, not dwelling on the past. All right, so exchange of information is pretty self-explanatory. You get exchange information, right? You have that dialogue, you see what's going on, see what's happening. You know, is there something I can change? Am I doing good? Am I doing bad? Like, help me, mentor me, help me get better. And those are the things that are going on, right? So achieving personal growth. You should have goals, right? You should set goals, and how to achieve those goals is someone has to tell you, are you doing good or are you doing bad, right? Like monthly counselings. Those are very, very good for feedbacks. You know, what are your short-term goals, long-term goals? How do we reach those goals? What are you doing well? What do you need to work on? That's the whole idea about giving positive feedback, or if it's negative feedback, something you can change. Provider finds out about self. All right, so you get to know a little bit about yourself, right? This is what's going on. This is what I did wrong. This is what I did right. And this is what I can change. This is what I can continue doing correctly. And the receiver gains insight. You know, it's like, okay, I understand I did this wrong, but this is how I can fix it because my provider said this is what's going on. This is how I can fix it. So it's pretty easy, right? Creates an open environment for effective operational interpersonal communication. So once that feedback starts coming and people start having these dialogues, and soldiers talk to soldiers and they build trust within the ranks and everything, is because they have their NCO or their OIC or whoever it is giving them feedback, and it's effective feedback, is properly done, and they understand, like, okay, my NCO is looking at me, my NCO is watching me, like, they understand what's going on, they care about me, they're concerned about my well-being, they're concerned about my personal growth, they're concerned about me in general, right? So it creates that open environment for that to happen, and that's what you want to do. You don't want to just say, hey, Private Lacey, you suck. That was the worst thing I've ever seen. Fix it. doesn't give me a lot to go off of, right? Well, how am I going to fix it? What did I do wrong? What can I do better? You know, what did I do right? Am I going to fix the right thing? Am I going to fix the wrong thing? It's like, no, why'd you fix your breathing? Your breathing was fine. It was your trigger squeeze I needed you to do. You didn't tell me it was my trigger squeeze. You just said to fix it, so I thought it was my breathing, right? So that's why you want to be specific, as we said before. And it says in the preparation for the future, not dwelling on the past, right? So you don't want to be concerned about, like, okay, my trigger squeeze. It's horrible. I did horrible. I didn't qualify. No, you don't want to think about that. You want to think about, okay, next time I go to the range or next time I'm up, it's my turn. I know I need to focus on my trigger squeeze, my body positioning, my breathing, my sight picture. I was told my breathing's good, so I just need to concentrate on these two things, and I'm going to do wonderful. It's going to be well, and we're going to knock it out, right? So you want to focus on the future. And as of right now, here's your TLOs, but we're not going to go over that. So we're going to go see how much you've learned so far. So what you should have went over and what you should have learned, during this briefing is the definition of communication. What are the elements of the communication process, which is communicators, message, channels, environment, feedback. The modes of communication, which is verbal and nonverbal. Some barriers of communication, which is physical, and then your perceptual barriers. The elements of listening, and then basically the three types of listening, which is active, inactive, and selective listening. All right, and then the types of feedbacks are evaluative and non-evaluative, right? So you want to describe, you do not want to belittle somebody and judge them. All right, so I'm Sergeant First Class Lacey, I'm the Brigade Equal Opportunity Advisor, and I will be followed by Sergeant First Class Johnson.
Once again, my name is Sergeant First Class Johnson, and I'm the Battalion EOL. And in closing, I would like to list the following EOL for the different companies. HAC is Sergeant First Class Law. Alpha Company is Staff Sergeant Croker and Staff Sergeant O'Neill. Bravo Company is Staff Sergeant Hervey. And Charlie Company is Staff Sergeant Natal Rivera. Lightning Force.